We're reading The Year of Miss Agnes by Kirkpatrick Hill, and today we're on chapter 11 and 12. One day, Miss Agnes made a long line on the wall with skinny white paper from Anderson's adding machine, and then she put numbers on the line to show how the years went. The numbers went backward till they got to 0, and then they went forward. The picture of Robin Hood was at the 1100 number, and then whenever we had history, we'd put another picture up. 1948, that was us today, and 1938 was a war picture. Miss Agnes made a picture of bombs dropping on England for that. And down at the other end, she made a picture of cavemen, the long ago time people, and a picture of the Russians coming to Alaska at the 1700 place. It was good to have that line. We could see how long ago things were happening with it. It made my thinking go straight. When the line was almost filled up, we played time machine. We pretended we had a time machine like the guy in the book Miss Agnes told us about, and we'd pick a time to go back to, and we'd pretend to land in a long ago time, and then we'd tell everyone what we saw when we were there back in time. That was really fun. Kenny made us laugh and laugh when he talked old-timey like Robin Hood, and them, methinks I see a damsel, and stuff like that. But you had to know what we'd learned to play time machine, because everyone would ask questions and try to trip you up. Miss Agnes never gave us tests. She just had us do things like this that made us remember what we'd learned. So it was really harder than a test, but it didn't seem like it somehow. Sometimes in the middle of anything, she'd turn to one of us and say, "Name the continents," or "What do you call animals without a backbone?" That type of question she'd ask us from what we'd studied before. It made everything stick in our minds better than when we knew she was going to do that It made everything stick in our minds better when we knew she was going to do that any old time. Even the little ones could remember really hard things that way. After school, sometimes I'd go over to Grandpa's and I'd tell him about the stuff we learned in history and science. He really liked me to do that. I asked Miss Agnes if I could have some of that skinny paper, and I made Grandpa one of those timelines too. I couldn't make the pictures on it good like my teacher, but after I told Grandpa, he knew what they were supposed to be. Grandpa never knew anything about the Romans and people like that. When I made that skirt thing they wear in the picture, he laughed and laughed. He couldn't read hardly any, but he liked to look at that thing a lot. Grandma kicked up a fuss, though, and said she didn't want that paper thing on her wall, and so Grandpa rolled it up and would look at it when she wasn't there. He would show his friends when they came to visit, and they liked it just as much as he did. Grandpa put the year he was born, 1878, on the line, and his friend old George put the year we moved from Dolby. The picture about World War I was the one they talked about the most, because I'd written under it what Miss Agnes had put on our timeline. 10 million dead, 21 million wounded. They couldn't get over that. Here they were trapping and hunting and raising their families, and away on the other side of the world this thing was happening, and they hardly knew because there weren't any radios then. Grandpa doesn't like to stay in the village so much. He likes to be out in the woods all the time, but he's too old to go by himself. So he and the other men sit around and talk about the old times. We like to sit and listen to that, us kids. Grandpa remembers when there were lots and lots of white men in our country, the ones who came to Wiseman and those places to get gold. The Indians helped lots of them when they got in trouble, like when they were out on the trail and they nearly froze. And sometimes those white men helped the Indians too, like when someone got sick, one of those men had medicine for it. They got along good together, Grandpa says. A lot of people around here who have grandpas who were those old miners. But Grandpa still works hard. He sets a net under the river ice in the winter, and he helps Plasker's mom with her fish trap. People give him moose and caribou, but he snares rabbits and ptarmigan to eat. And he and Grandma go fish camp with us in the summer. What he misses is when he and his father would go way up north to hunt mountain sheep, or caribou and moose. Those were his best times, he says. There weren't any moose or caribou around our village in the old days. They hardly saw them then, so they had to travel a long way to get them. He'd tell us stories his mama told him about before there were any white men in the country. His mama and them used to make a sod house, half underground, and they'd live there in the winter just to be warm. And they traveled all the time to find meat to eat. No villages then. When they started a school in Alakakit, his mama told him to go to school. She wanted him to learn to read and talk English. She was smart that way, he says. She knew he would need to know that stuff, the way times were a-changin', and she thought maybe if he went to school, he'd have an easier life than she had. He went the first time when he was 12. He says they didn't use paper then, only slates to write on with chalk. He went there for a couple of years, just in the fall before winter camp, so he only got through the first grade work. That's why he liked to hear about all the stuff he missed in the other grades. One of the best things of all was when Miss Agnes ordered a little microscope for us, and we could look down inside it and see the things that lived in water. That was a thing you could look in forever, even if it made your eyes feel tired and sore. With Miss Agnes, the world got bigger and then it got smaller. We used to think we were something, but when she told us about all the things that were bigger than us, the universe and all that, and then all the things that were smaller, too small even to see. So people were sort of in between, not big or small, just in between. That was a really interesting thing to think about. Jimmy Sam brought in something every day to look at under the microscope. Miss Agnes told him there were much stronger microscopes and he could see things even smaller than we could see with our microscope. Jimmy looked really surprised. Where do they have those microscopes? He asked. Miss Agnes told him he could go to college in Fairbanks and study with those powerful microscopes. Jimmy looked like he didn't really believe that, and I didn't believe it either. People from our village didn't go to college. Miss Agnes got kind of mad when we all looked at her like that. Just because he lived in a village all his life didn't mean he couldn't become a scientist or anything else, she said. She was starting to rattle off about this scientist or this artist or this writer who started out in a village just like ours and went on to school. We were quite surprised, but Jimmy said something different. Sam was something different than surprised. His face was all red, and I could tell he made up his mind to do this microscope thing right there while Miss Agnes was talking. In a way, we weren't surprised about Jimmy, how he started to think like that. He was quiet, so quiet he could be there all day and never say anything unless you asked him a question. He had this way of looking at things very carefully, even little things. He was always taking things apart and putting them back together, anything he was curious about. He was just a little kid, Grandpa said, when he took apart his dad's inboard motor. His dad got so mad that time because he was ready to go set the fish net, and he had to wait for Jimmy to put his engine back together. Jimmy was like that with other stuff too. Once I saw him looking at a fern under the spruce tree by our school, and he looked at it for a long time. Then he began counting the little leaves. I asked him what he was doing, and he looked at me surprised because he didn't know that I was there. They come out just right, he said. What? I said. I didn't know what he was talking about. Look, he said, on each row there's just one more leaf less until it gets to the top. How does the fern know how to do this just right? I just goggled at him and shrugged. I think that's why Jimmy didn't talk so much, because no one could figure out what he was talking about, just Miss Agnes. Chapter 12. There was a record Miss Agnes used to play for us from where she used to live in England. King's Choir, it was called. Those people were singing in a big, big church made of stone, so their voices would echo like when we yelled down the bluff. When she played that record, she looked far away. We could see she was homesick for that place. My father was a teacher there before he died, she told us. In a church, we asked? No, at the college there, Cambridge. Did he teach kids like us? No, he taught mathematics to older students, college students. This church is there, right next to where he taught. I used to go there to listen to them sing when I was a child. She'll be happy to be back in England. After Robin Hood, Miss Agnes read to us Greek myths. Boy, those were something. To think of all the mischief those old-time people could get up to, changing into trees and all that. We loved the monster ones, and we drew pictures of the Chimera and Hydra and the three-headed dog. That was a good one. And after that, she read to us a story about Ulysses, and there had more monsters. There was this one with just one big eye. I forget what you call him. After that, she read to us all the fairy tales in the big red book. Those were kind of like the stories old Toby and Grandma would tell us at night at fish camp. Those old stories about the raven and people who turn into animals and all that. We told Miss Agnes about those stories, and after that, Miss Agnes would read us a fairy tale, and then we would tell her one of the old-time stories. Miss Toby told them in Indian, so they sounded different when you tried to tell them in English. Not so good somehow. But that was fun, those fairy tales. My best was Snow White, and Bertha's too. We liked to think about those funny little men.